the special prosecutor, Martin Amidu, has responded to calls for his office to investigate the PDS concession agreement that is now being suspended over anomalies and concerns of possible fraud. JoyNews editor Fred Smith has a copy of his response to this and interesting details contained in there. So Mr. Amidu says, I am not going to investigate this, Fred, and he gives reasons.
Well, indeed, he spends, in fact, it's about 7 paragraphs of his piece telling us that he's monitored the media space and realizes that people do not really understand. People are confused as to what he is there to do. And so he gives a quote. He says, I have severally explained why the Office of the Special Prosecutor cannot investigate the alleged commission of offenses contained in any draft of our final 1999 forensic audits of SNIT's reports by an alleged minister in the government, the senior minister's forensic audit reports, the recent bank scandals and bust allegations which do not point directly to the suspected commission of corruption and corruption-related offenses. And makes also reference to a speech he delivered to an international workshop, at an international workshop of auditors in Accra. This was in September last year. And it talked about the role of the special prosecutor in strengthening accountability for public funds, the jurisdiction of the office. And it says that it hopes that it helps well-meaning Ghanaians not to continue to create the impression that the office can be a knight errant roaming at will in search of its own ideals of crimes it wishes to investigate and prosecute. And I'll give you extracts of those statements he made in the presentation last year. It says there's the perception out there amongst the populace that the Office of the Special Prosecutor can investigate and prosecute criminal offenses under the laws of Ghana. Granted that more than 65% of the population may not be able to read and properly understand the Office of the Special Prosecutor Act, the problem is compounded when persons, civil society and political organizations which ought to know better choose to petition or complain to the office on matters which have nothing to do with corruption and corruption-related offenses. And worst of all, these enlightened persons and organizations appear to be petitioning the office more for media publicity than political point scoring than pursuing genuine complaints against adversaries. Their modus operandi is to write a letter, petition, or complaint, have it published in the media long before submitting or posting the complaint to the office. And the subject of such persons and organizations is not to seek a fair and impartial investigation and prosecution, but to do maximum damage to perceived political opponents even before they can be investigated. It is a type of mob lynching which no reasonable and impartial law enforcement agency should be used for. Every citizen is entitled to the constitutional right to be presumed innocent and not to be presumed guilty and tried by public opinion before determination, even to commence investigation. And
indeed, Fred, in that same letter, he says the office does not and cannot investigate financial and economic offenses in which no evidence of corruption can be demonstrated from the beginning. And he is actually saying that just give the office personal knowledge of facts to support an abuse of public office for private gain, and the office will take up the investigations, Fred. So you mentioned earlier some similar cases. He said they cannot investigate because it's not under his jurisdiction. Basically, all he's trying to say is, I have a mandate stipulated or stated in the law. You cannot force me to do anything beyond that.
Indeed. And I quote you again from that presentation he made last year, which he's also captured in this document he's released this morning. He says that an analysis of the information I've given you earlier shows that out of the 10 offenses listed from the Criminal Offences Act, 6 of them are misdemeanors, 2 are felonies, and the 2 are unclassified. The balance of criminal offenses in the Criminal Offences Act, which have not been apportioned to the office of to deal with several felonies to be investigated by various law and order enforcement agencies under the Inspector General of Police, the Director General CID, Director General Economic and Organized Crimes Office. So he's indicated which institution can't handle them. Then he goes on to say that apart from the challenges which the office has faced since the assumption of office of the special prosecutor. The foregoing explains why the office is not investigating the several cases or several alleged or suspected offences perceived to have been committed by particular ministers of state and operatives under the present government and previous governments. The office does not and cannot investigate financial and economic offences which no evidence of corruption can be demonstrated from the beginning.
So,
Okay,
just wrap it up.
Well, he goes on to make an appeal. He says this amounts to propaganda and pleads with all anti-corruption civil society members to help in enlightening ordinary members of the public about the limited jurisdiction of the Office of the Special Prosecutor so that they do not lose confidence in the office for not investigating cases for which it has clearly no jurisdiction. Creating serious and deliberate misperception about the jurisdiction of the office is one sure way those who fear anti-corruption activism can kill trust in the office.
Thank you very much. JoyNews editor Fred Smith there giving us details of a letter or a statement released by the Special Prosecutor Martin Amidu responding to calls for him to investigate the recent PDS scandal. In fact, he's actually not in the country, and he wrote this from Ouagadougou, and he says he's been monitoring the media space and all the calls and has decided to respond, saying that his office has no jurisdiction to investigate financial and economic crimes.
And he seemed to be making a statement that Parliament, he's not happy about the fact that Parliament limited his powers in dealing with corruption. You recall that in the case against Mahama Yariga, the High Court ruled that it is not within his jurisdiction to handle aspects of that case, and so that was thrown out. He's limited in this situation as well.
There's more to this. It's about a 5 or 4 page document published on my journal, and you can read the details there for yourself.